In New
That
York's
bracelet, where
most
did you get it?
exclusive dining room,
It was my
billionaire
mother's.
Richard Sterling froze
She passed away
mid-breath,
when I was very young.
not at the taste of his wine, but at the sight of a waitress's cheap brass bracelet
Is that my
shaped
mother's
like a
bracelet?
phoenix. That single spark of recognition cracked open a secret buried for 20
That
years.
bracelet. Where did you
Pulling
get it?
26-year-old Claire Morgan, a struggling waitress caring for her sick mother, into a storm of hidden identities, family betrayal, and a fortune built on lies. One ordinary night would ignite a fight that could shatter empires or set her free. Where are you watching from? Comment your city or country below. What was it about a cheap, old bracelet that could stop the richest man in the room from breathing? The Marlowe room hummed like a restrained orchestra, every note softened by velvet drapes and low amber sconces. Flatware chimed, a silver whisper over porcelain. The air tasted of seared scallops and buttered thyme, with a faint thread of citrus from the bartender zesting lemons at the marble. Claire Morgan moved through it all with the choreography of long nights, pivoting past a sommelier's elbows, easing a water carafe onto linen, catching a wine glass by the stem before it could shiver off a crowded side plate. Her white apron had been bleached to a stern, hospital brightness. Her black shoes squeaked near silently against the herringbone floor. She was 26 and tired in a way that lived behind the eyes, the kind of tired that counted hours, not in shifts, but in prescriptions. She had learned to tuck her worry down deep where tips couldn't reach it. On her wrist, the Phoenix bracelet. Old brass, worn to a gentle glow by years of skin. The bird's wings curved around her pulse, and when she turned to avoid a server's tray, a cone of warm spotlight caught the metal and set it briefly on fire. No one noticed the glint except the man at table 9. He sat with the posture of a person used to owning the air around him, suit like city steel, hair smoothed precise, jawline you could cut limes on. His watch could have paid Claire's rent through winter. His name, whispered along the banquette by people who pretended not to whisper, was Richard Sterling. He was the kind of name that made managers materialize from nowhere, the kind that ordered a Bordeaux and a concession in the same breath. He lifted his glass, the garnet liquid painting his cuff in a faint stain of light, and then the light on Claire's wrist flashed again, and stop. The glass didn't drop. He did not gasp. It was smaller than that, which made it larger. His hand paused halfway, like someone had told him to freeze for a portrait. His eyes fixed on the Phoenix, and all at once the life left his face, as if a window in his mind had been thrown open in winter. The color drained. The man who negotiated mergers without blinking suddenly blinked, slow, like his body had to reboot the simple mechanics of sight and breath. Claire felt the gaze before she found the source. The bracelet was nothing. A flea market oddity, her mother's, a hand-me-down that had become second skin. In the mirror each morning, she'd fasten it and think of the woman in the next room, oxygen machine sighing, knuckles pale, voice thin as paper, saying, "Wear it, honey, for luck, for me." Claire turned to table 9, smile loaded and ready, the smile that worked like gaffer tape on any evening, and met eyes that were storm-dark and suddenly childlike. Mr. Sterling's glass landed on the coaster with a careful thud. "Everything all right, sir?" Claire heard herself say, but the room seemed to move away from her voice, like sound sliding off oiled wood. She didn't want to talk. She wanted to step back, to become a stripe in the wallpaper, but her feet stayed. He looked past her to the bracelet, not at her face. The focus had an intimacy she hadn't asked for. His lips parted once, closed, then again, searching for a word that wasn't on the menu. She felt the attention at the table ripple outward. The woman beside him, all black silk and pinned hair, angled to follow his line of sight. A junior banker across the aisle paused mid-joke. Even the maitre d', who never looked at anything below eye level, flicked a glance toward Claire's wrist. The kitchen bell pinged. Steam, garlic sweet, and clam brine salty exhaled through the pass. Claire's body acted while her brain hovered above it. She placed the plates, a ballet of heat and gravity, laid spoons where spoons should go, aligned knife blades with the table edge. The bracelet winked again. Mr. Sterling reached for his napkin and missed it, fingertips slipping across linen. For a split second, the mask tore. Panic widened his eyes, not theatrical, not public. Raw, private panic, the kind a person hides in a mirror. He realized he had missed. He tried again, slower, and then he sat back down like someone had knocked the command out of his spine. Claire's first thought was stroke. Her second was hypoglycemia. Third, the manager will eat me alive if a VIP dies near my station. She inhaled hard through her nose, coffee and bleach, her whole life, and pulled in a calmer breath behind it. She spotted the shallow rise and fall of his suit coat. He wasn't dying. He was remembering. That was the texture of his stillness. A heavy reel spun up in his head, a film that had dust on it. The woman in black silk leaned in, soft asking if he needed air. He didn't answer. He was cataloging details on Claire like evidence. Dark hair gathered in a no-nonsense bun, the frayed edge of the server's notebook peeking from her apron, the bird circling her wrist as if it had been circling for years. Claire nearly covered the bracelet with her other hand, reflex of modesty or superstition, but she didn't. Something prickled at the base of her skull, curiosity, the cousin of fear. She'd seen every kind of rich world drama in this room. Proposals staged like ad campaigns, divorces conducted with forensic politeness, deals that stained the night. She had never seen a man look at her like she was a door. He stood. The chair legs whispered back from the table. A draft slipped across Claire's forearms. The room's temperature didn't change, but she felt colder. He held the edge of the table, left hand whitening at the knuckles, and for a heartbeat Claire saw an echo of another man, in another room, seeing this same bracelet. Then he sat too sharply, as if his knees had refused another second of his weight. Silence is rare in a restaurant. True silence is unnatural. But a quick hush fell like a napkin, fast and discreet, over 3 tables in his orbit. Phones turned fractionally. The bartender slowed his pour. At the pass, a chef dragged a spoon across a sauce and forgot to taste it. The maitre d' flicked a look at the manager. The manager flicked one at Claire, and Claire felt her throat go sand dry. She stepped back one clean pace. Her smile didn't break, but it became a posture instead of a feeling. A server behind her bumped her shoulder, muttered sorry, and the jolt sent another lick of light down her wrist. Mr. Sterling flinched, an almost invisible hitch. He blinked his way back into the present with the stubborn dignity of a person used to performing on command. He adjusted his cuff. He swallowed. He nodded at the woman in silk. He nodded at no one in particular, which felt worse. Claire's brain did math. Do I fetch water, manager, medic, all 3? But her hands had already lifted the pitcher, a humble salvation. She poured, the thin stream catching light, whispering against the glass. He took it, sipped, and held the rim half an inch from his lip, as if listening to the taste. The bracelet cooled on her skin. Her heartbeat settled into the music of the room again. Bass, thud, clink, murmur. Then came the turn of every head. It started near the bar, with a first couple's curiosity, and moved like a tide toward table 9 and the waitress with an old brass bird around her wrist. Claire felt it land on her shoulders. This collective gaze, this weight, and she didn't know where to put her eyes. She thought of her mother in the Bronx apartment, of machines breathing with her, of the rent due on Friday, of the way luck sometimes felt like a trick. The phoenix's beak pressed gentle against her pulse. She froze, still as flatware laid for a photo, and in that stillness, the Marlowe room turned to look at her. The smell of fried garlic still clung to her apron when Claire unlocked the door to their Bronx apartment. The lock stuck halfway, like always, and she had to shoulder it until the wood frame gave. Inside, the air was sharp with disinfectant and the faint whir of the oxygen machine. Her mother, Amelia, slept in the recliner under a crocheted blanket, her hand curled gently against her chest. Claire slipped her shoes off silently, letting the ache in her arches breathe, then set her apron across the counter where past-due bills sat in accusing stacks. Every day blurred into the same cycle, double shifts at the Marlowe room, late nights counting tips, mornings spent spoon-feeding oatmeal and measuring medicine. Rent had climbed again. The pharmacy bill was tucked beneath the landlord's note, both stamped in red. Claire poured herself cold coffee from yesterday's pot, ignoring the sour bite on her tongue. She pulled open the drawer beneath the microwave and took out a small wooden keepsake box. The lid creaked like an old secret. Inside lay the Phoenix bracelet and a faded photograph. The bracelet gleamed dully, the wings smoothed by years of wear. Next to it, the photo, blurry, sun-bleached, showed a younger Amelia standing in front of a grand mansion. The lines of the house were strange to Claire. Tall windows, ivy-choked stone, a carved crest above the door. She had asked once, long ago, and Amelia had only shaken her head, saying, "It's just an old place I worked at. Doesn't matter now." But Claire had never stopped wondering. The next afternoon at work, she confided to Lena Torres, her best friend and fellow waitress. Lena wiped down a polished bar table, her ponytail snapping with every shake of her head. "Claire, you don't have time for fairy tales. That bracelet? Cute, sure. But chasing mysteries won't pay Con Edison. And that picture? Probably just some estate your mom cleaned houses in." Claire wanted to argue, but swallowed it. Lena's practicality was the ballast that kept her from drifting into impossible hopes. Still, she couldn't shake the image of Richard Sterling's face, the way his confidence had collapsed at the sight of her bracelet. She replayed it in her head while carrying trays, while polishing glasses, while wiping butter smears from linen. Her thoughts shattered that evening when Mr. Doyle, the restaurant manager, caught her adjusting the bracelet during service. His voice cut through the chatter like a snapped string. "Miss Morgan, are we accessorizing now? Did you raid a thrift store before clock-in?" Laughter rippled from a table of VIP guests, men in tailored suits, their watches catching the same chandeliers that ignored her. Claire's cheeks burned hot as the copper in her bracelet. She forced a tight smile, bowing her head, while Doyle smirked and turned back toward his patrons as though delivering them a private performance. The humiliation burned deeper than fatigue. She wanted to rip the bracelet off, shove it into her pocket, pretend it had never mattered. But when she caught the reflection of its curve in the mirrored wall, she thought of her mother's whisper, "Wear it, honey, for luck." Her hand closed over the Phoenix, stubborn and trembling. The night ended with her standing at the subway platform, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the city wind tugging at her jacket. She held the keepsake box in her bag, pressed against her ribs like a heartbeat. The photograph weighed on her mind heavier than the tips in her pocket. Lena's warning, Doyle's ridicule, the bills on the counter, all real. But so was the way a billionaire had nearly fainted at a glimpse of this cheap junk. Claire didn't know yet that the bracelet was a key. She only knew the lock it would open would change everything. Rain misted down Broadway 3 nights later, slicking the sidewalks in sheets of neon reflection. Claire tucked her coat tighter around her and ducked into the Marlowe room for her evening shift, expecting nothing more than clattering plates and aching feet. But when she slipped into the dining room, she froze. Richard Sterling was back. He sat at a corner table this time, alone. No entourage, no silk-draped companion. Just a glass of water untouched, his profile rigid against the golden sconces. For a moment, Claire thought she'd imagined him, a ghost conjured by exhaustion. Then his eyes lifted, and their gaze locked. Not the startled stare of before, something quieter, deliberate. Her tray nearly tipped as she passed. She steadied it, set down plates at a banker's table, and turned to find him standing at the edge of the aisle, waiting. He didn't summon her with a wave or a word. He simply inclined his head, a command wrapped in courtesy. Against instinct, against Lena's warnings still echoing in her head, Claire followed him into a side alcove near the wine racks. The silence smelled of oak barrels and dust. Richard's voice broke it, low and urgent. "The bracelet. Where did you get it?" Claire blinked. "It was my mother's. She gave it to me years ago." He hesitated, as though weighing the cost of the next question. "Do you have anything else of hers?" Her hand moved to her apron pocket. She pulled out her mother's keepsake box, something she'd brought tonight without knowing why. Inside, folded and worn thin, was the photograph of Amelia, her mother, standing before the ivy-covered mansion. Claire unfolded it carefully and held it out. Richard reached with fingers that trembled. His eyes devoured the image, his jaw slackening. "This house," he whispered. Then he pressed the photo closer, his breath hitching. "No, this can't." Claire frowned. "You know it?" He swallowed hard, his composure fracturing. "That's the Sterling estate. And the woman—" His voice broke into silence. He traced the blurred outline of Amelia's face, younger, freer, framed by light. "Liana," he said finally, the word tasting like both prayer and curse. "My wife. Lost 20 years ago." Claire's world stuttered. "No, my mother's name is Amelia. She's never—" But Richard's eyes were oceans of grief. "She disappeared after the accident. They told me she was dead. And yet, here she is in your hands." The wine cellar hummed with the weight of unspoken truths. Claire wanted to demand explanations, to shake him until the pieces fit. But he stepped back, suddenly aware of walls and ears. His mask of billionaire control snapped back into place. "This stays between us," he said, voice sharp now, lined with fear. "No one else hears of it. Not yet." "Why?" she shot back, her pulse loud in her ears. "Because scandal destroys empires," he muttered. "Because if you're right, everything I've built, everything, could collapse." The maitre d's voice echoed down the corridor, calling Richard's name. He tucked the photo into Claire's palm, curling her fingers over it. "We'll speak again," he whispered, eyes dark and haunted. Then he turned, coat flaring like a curtain, and strode back into the golden light of the dining room. Claire stood frozen, the photograph burning in her hand, the phoenix bracelet hot against her skin. The hum of glasses and laughter felt miles away. She pressed her back to the cool oak rack and let the truth settle like ash in her chest. Her mother's past was not just hidden, it was tied to the richest, most untouchable man in New York. And he had promised this was only the beginning. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under the apartment door like an unwelcome draft. Claire found it half buried beneath grocery flyers, plain and unmarked, except for her name typed in neat capitals. Her fingers hesitated before tearing the seal. Inside lay a single white card, Richard Sterling's business card, embossed with gold edges. But what made her breath falter wasn't his name. In the corner, inked faintly in blue, was a hand-drawn phoenix. The bracelet on her wrist seemed to hum in recognition. She carried the card to the kitchen table, laying it beside the pile of unpaid bills. The contrast mocked her, millions in marble towers versus her chipped formica surface. She could still hear his voice in that wine-scented alcove. "We'll speak again." But this was invitation and warning tangled into one. Lena showed up that afternoon, still in uniform, hair pinned back with a pencil like always. She spotted the card immediately. "Please tell me that's not what I think it is." Claire tried to sound casual. "It's just a card. He wants to talk." Lena snorted, dropping her bag on the floor. "Rich people don't just want to talk. They want something, and they never give anything for free." She picked up the card, studied the phoenix symbol. "Looks like a trap dressed in fancy stationery." Claire rubbed her temples, the day's fatigue settling into her bones. But what if it's answers? He knew the house in the photo. He called my mother by another name. "That's exactly why you should run the other way." Lena crossed her arms. "You've got a sick mom, a mountain of bills, and now some billionaire is dangling mysteries in front of you. Claire, I love you, but this is how girls like us get crushed." The words stung because they rang true. Claire remembered Doyle's sneer, the laughter of VIPs, the weight of humiliation. She wasn't built for boardrooms or whispered scandals. And yet, her mother's face in that old photograph, standing before the mansion, lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake. Night fell heavy in the Bronx. The hum of traffic outside the window blended with the wheeze of the oxygen machine. Amelia stirred in her chair, murmuring something half-dreamed, half-forgotten. Claire sat across the room with the phone in her hand, the business card propped against a lamp. Her thumb hovered over the digits. She imagined Richard Sterling on the other end, waiting with truths that could shatter or save. She imagined Lena's voice scolding, "Don't do it. Don't even think about it." The bracelet caught the glow of the lamp, its brass bird gleaming faintly like it knew the answer before she did. Claire's hand trembled as she whispered to herself, "Should I call?" And in the silence of that cramped apartment, it felt as though the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for her choice. 2 days later, Claire found herself staring up at a building that seemed to scrape the sky itself. Sterling Enterprises, all glass and steel, a mirror to the city's restless hunger. The revolving doors spun like a challenge. She almost turned back 3 times before stepping inside. The lobby swallowed her in cold marble and echoing footsteps. Men and women in suits glided past, their shoes clicking in perfect rhythm, their watches flashing discreet wealth. Claire smoothed her simple navy dress, bought second-hand, and tugged at the strap of her worn purse. She felt like a smudge on a painting. At the reception desk, her voice caught. I'm here to see Mr. Richard Sterling." The receptionist's practiced smile faltered, eyes flicking to the clipboard, then to Claire's dress. "And you are?" "Claire Morgan. He's expecting me." Something shifted behind the woman's gaze, skepticism edged with curiosity. She picked up the phone, murmured into it, then gestured. "Take the elevator to the 42nd floor." Claire's knees wobbled as she crossed the marble floor, the phoenix bracelet warm against her wrist. The 42nd floor was quieter, hushed with money. Plush carpeting swallowed footsteps. Art gleamed on the walls, all oils and bronzes Claire had only ever dusted in other people's houses. She was adjusting her purse strap again when a voice, sharp as a paper cut, sliced through the silence. "Well, what do we have here?" She turned. A man leaned against the doorway of a glass-walled office. Late 30s, immaculate suit, blonde hair slicked back with calculation. His smirk was a knife. "I'm Julian Sterling," he said, letting the name linger like a challenge. "Chief Operating Officer, cousin to Richard." His eyes skimmed her dress, her shoes, her hands. "And you are a waitress, aren't you? With a blurry little photograph, thinking you belong here?" Claire stiffened. Heat flushed her cheeks, but she forced her chin up. "I'm here because Mr. Sterling asked me." Julian chuckled, slow and venomous. "My cousin's been known to indulge sentimental distractions. But let's be honest. You're out of your depth. A piece of cheap jewelry doesn't buy you a place in this building." Her grip tightened on the strap of her purse. She wanted to tell him about the photograph, the way Richard's face had broken at the sight of it. But something in Julian's eyes told her not to. He didn't want truth. He wanted to break her. She turned slightly, ready to retreat, when another voice echoed down the hall. "Claire." Richard Sterling stood at the end of the corridor, his expression unreadable, but his eyes, those storm-dark eyes, lit with something startling. Hope. Julian straightened, the smirk slipping for a heartbeat before snapping back. Richard moved closer, ignoring his cousin entirely, his attention fixed only on Claire. "Come with me," he said quietly. And for the first time since stepping into that tower of glass, Claire's heart steadied. She wasn't here by accident. She was here because the truth, whatever it was, had finally opened its door. Richard led her through a set of carved oak doors into a hushed gallery, nothing like the sleek corridors outside. The air was cool, faintly scented with polish and cedar. Spotlights glowed on velvet-lined cases, each displaying jewelry shaped like firebirds, brooches, pendants, rings, all variations of a single emblem, the phoenix. Claire's breath caught. It was as though her bracelet had been multiplied into 100 forms, each more ornate, but none as worn, as lived in, as hers. "This," Richard said, voice lowered with reverence, "is the Phoenix Collection. My family has kept it for generations. Every piece has a story. Every piece has a lineage." She stepped closer to one case. Inside lay a gold ring, its wings flared upward, ruby eyes catching the light. The resemblance to her bracelet was undeniable. Her fingers trembled as she touched the glass. Richard noticed. "Show me yours," he urged. Claire hesitated, then slipped the bracelet from her wrist and placed it in his palm. The contrast was sharp, her simple brass against the gallery's gold and gems. But Richard stared at it as though it were the most precious of them all. He looked up, voice almost breaking. "Where did you truly get this?" Her throat tightened. "It was my mother's. She gave it to me when I was little. Said it would bring me luck." Richard exhaled, the sound jagged. "Your mother, Amelia, you called her?" "Yes." His gaze flicked to the purse she carried. "And the photograph?" She drew it out carefully, the edges soft with age. Richard froze. His hand shook as he lifted it closer. "This woman. This house." The silence stretched taut, until footsteps cut through it. Julian appeared in the doorway, his voice sharp as glass. "Enough of this!" He strode forward, eyes flashing at Claire. "Do you really think anyone's going to believe this fairy tale? A waitress with a trinket, spinning lies to scam the Sterlings? It's pathetic." Claire flinched, heat rushing to her face. "I'm not lying." Julian sneered, circling like a predator. "Of course you are. You saw the collection in some article, Mamo, bought yourself a knockoff, and now you want a payout." He turned to Richard. "Cousin, don't tell me you're falling for this." But Richard's expression hardened. He placed the photo beside the ring case and the bracelet, his voice steady now. "Julian, that woman in the picture, she's wearing this same bracelet." Julian's jaw tightened. "Coincidence?" "No." Richard's voice rang out, firm. "It's proof. Proof that the accident 20 years ago may not be what we believed." Claire's heart hammered. The gallery's quiet seemed to pulse with the weight of his words. Julian stepped closer, eyes cold. "You reopen that case, Dom. You'll tear this family apart. You'll drag our name through the mud." But Richard didn't waver. He looked at Claire, then back at the photo, then at his cousin. "It doesn't matter. The truth will not stay buried. I'm reopening the investigation." Claire clutched her bracelet to her chest, the brass bird warming against her skin. For the first time, she felt the tide shifting, not just around her, but because of her, and it terrified her as much as it thrilled her. The Sterling Estates dining hall was nothing like the Marlowe room. It was bigger, colder, and filled with silence that weighed heavier than any laughter. A long oak table stretched the length of the room, polished to a mirror. At its head sat Richard, shoulders taut with determination. Around him gathered cousins, uncles, and a scattering of board members whose fortunes rose and fell with the Sterling name. Claire sat near the end, feeling the eyes of strangers pierce her like knives. Her thrift store dress looked even plainer under the glitter of chandeliers. The phoenix bracelet clung to her wrist like an ember refusing to die. Julian was first to break the silence. He leaned forward, his cufflinks catching the light, his voice smooth but laced with venom. "This is madness. Digging up 20-year-old ghosts? It will ruin us. Do you have any idea what shareholders will do if rumors of scandal leak? Our reputation, our partnerships, our fortune, obliterated." Murmurs of agreement rippled across the table. Claire's stomach twisted. She could almost hear Lena whispering in her head, "Don't get crushed by their world." But then Richard spoke, his voice firm. "The truth matters. If what Claire brings us is real, then we owe it to Liana and to ourselves to face it." Julian slammed his hand against the table. "Truth? Or a waitress with a blurry photograph and a piece of cheap metal trying to scam her way into our family?" Claire flinched, but something inside her straightened. She rose slowly, the scrape of her chair echoing like defiance. She held the photograph in one hand, the bracelet in the other, and lifted them where everyone could see. "This isn't about money," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "It's about memory, about love, about honesty. I don't care about your fortunes or your shareholders. I care about the woman who raised me, who whispered stories about rising from ashes even when she couldn't stand on her own. If the truth is buried just to protect your wealth, then you've already lost more than money can buy." The room shifted. Some averted their eyes, others frowned, but no one spoke. Richard's gaze met hers across the table, his expression raw. His voice was barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the silence. "Could it be you're Liana's daughter?" The words landed like thunder. Gasps rippled around the table. Claire's breath hitched, her knees wobbled, but she didn't sit. The bracelet seemed to pulse against her skin, as if alive. Julian's face darkened, his smirk gone, replaced with something sharper, fear. He opened his mouth to strike back, but Richard raised a hand, silencing him. And for the first time, Claire saw it. A crack in the fortress of sterling wealth, opened not by power or money, but by a waitress holding on to a mother's keepsake. The hall brimmed with tension, waiting for someone, anyone, to make the next move. The storm outside the Sterling estate beat against the windows, but the true storm was inside Claire's chest. Richard's question still rang in the air. Liana's daughter. She could barely breathe, barely think. Her fingers brushed the bracelet, its metal warm as though it carried a pulse of its own. A memory flickered. Her mother's voice, weak but steady, whispering as she fastened it years ago. "A phoenix never dies. It rises again." Claire had heard it so often she thought it was just a comfort phrase, something to soothe a child. But now, under the crushing weight of Sterling stares, it burned with new meaning. She repeated it aloud, almost without realizing. "A phoenix never dies. It rises again." Richard's head snapped toward her. His chair scraped back sharply. "What did you just say?" Claire's heart thudded. "That's what my mother always told me. Every night when she tucked me in. Every time she saw me losing hope." Richard's face drained of color, then filled with something else. Recognition. Disbelief. A fragile hope cracking open after 2 decades. His voice shook. "That was Liana's phrase. She said it to me the day before the accident. Again and again. Her promise. Her vow." The air shifted. Even Julian blinked, caught off guard. For once, he had no sharp retort ready. Richard turned fully toward Claire now, his eyes glistening. "Your mother. Amelia, you said? Dark hair, eyes like yours?" "Yes," Claire whispered. "She's sick, but she's all I've ever had." Richard's breath broke, ragged. He staggered back a step, clutching the edge of the table. "It's her. My God. It has to be her. She didn't die. She survived." His voice cracked, raw with something between joy and grief. "And she's been living in the shadows all this time." Gasps echoed around the hall. The weight of money, power, and legacy hung suspended, meaningless for a heartbeat. Julian finally found his tongue, his voice sharp and frantic. "You're leaping at ghosts. She could have read that phrase in a diary, or Amelia stole it." But Richard cut him off, his tone like steel. "No. I know my wife. I know her words. And if Amelia is Liana, then the truth has been buried for 20 years, and I will not let it stay buried." He turned to Claire, his eyes wet, his voice trembling. "I have to see her. I have to see your mother." Claire clutched the bracelet tighter, her mind a swirl of terror and relief. The life she knew, the Bronx apartment, the bills, the quiet sacrifices, suddenly felt like a thin curtain hiding a story too large to contain. And for the first time, the phoenix around her wrist didn't feel like a relic. It felt like a key about to unlock everything. The Bronx apartment never looked smaller than when Richard Sterling stepped inside. His tailored suit seemed to shrink the space, his presence crowding the peeling wallpaper, the sagging couch, the oxygen machine's steady hiss. Claire hovered near the kitchen counter, twisting the bracelet around her wrist as though it could anchor her. Her mother, Amelia, sat in her recliner, the crocheted blanket pooled around her knees. She stirred when the door closed, her eyes blinking open, cloudy yet still holding a spark. For a moment, she only stared at the stranger in her living room. Then something shifted. Her breath caught. Richard knelt beside her chair. The billionaire's voice, normally clipped with command, cracked soft. "Liana?" Amelia frowned. "No, my name is Amelia." But her voice trembled, as though another name hovered just beyond reach. Claire stepped forward, heart pounding. "Mom, he thinks he knew you. From before." Richard pulled a photograph from his jacket. One Claire had seen in the Sterling Gallery. A portrait of Liana, younger, radiant, the same phoenix ring glinting on her hand. He laid it gently on Amelia's lap. Her fingers traced the edges. For a long moment, silence ruled, broken only by the machine's wheeze. Then Amelia whispered, "That dress, I remember the weight of it." Claire's throat tightened. Richard's eyes glistened. "Yes," and the phrase, "Say it." Amelia closed her eyes. "A phoenix never dies. It rises again." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I used to tell someone that. Someone I loved." The memories came in fragments, jagged but bright. A car skidding, glass shattering, water swallowing everything. Then hands pulling her out. A stranger's voice urging her to breathe. A hospital where no one knew her name. She had chosen Amelia because the nurse had whispered Ave Maria over her. Richard pressed his forehead to her hand. "It's you, my Liana." His voice shook, reverent and raw. Claire swallowed against the lump in her throat. For years she had carried her mother's past like a locked box, never knowing the key was already on her wrist. But the moment of reunion was broken by a sharp knock at the door. Lena slipped inside, breathless from her rush upstairs. "Claire, we need to talk." She glanced at Richard, then at Amelia. Her eyes narrowed. "Whatever's happening here, be careful. People like him, people with that much money, they don't just want family. They want control." Richard rose, spine straightening. "I don't want her fortune. I want my family back." Lena's gaze lingered on Claire. "Just remember, truth doesn't pay rent. Make sure you're not the one who gets burned." But Claire barely heard. She looked at her mother, her real identity flickering back like flame, and at Richard, the man whose world had collided with hers. And in that cramped apartment filled with too many bills and too much hope, Claire realized her life would never return to ordinary. She was standing on the edge of a new story, one that would either set her free or consume her completely. The city was quieter at dawn, the Bronx streets washed in gray light. Claire sat at the kitchen table, the wooden keepsake box open before her. The bracelet rested in her palm, heavier now, not in weight, but in meaning. Across the room, Liana dozed in her recliner, her breathing steadier than Claire had heard in months. Richard had stayed through the night, his hand clasped around hers, speaking softly of memories long buried until fragments surfaced. The accident, the years lost, the family torn apart. Piece by piece, the woman Claire called Mom was becoming whole again. By sunrise, the decision had been made. The Sterlings would accept the truth. Richard would restore Liana's name, and the estate that once felt like a fortress of secrets would open its doors again. But Claire had her own choice to make. She met Richard in the hallway as he prepared to leave. He looked years younger, his face softened by something rare, peace. "Your family," he said simply, as though declaring the sky was blue. "There's a place for you now, for both of you." Claire shook her head. "I don't want a place in your world. Not like that." He frowned. "Why?" She held up the bracelet, letting the light catch its worn brass. "Because this isn't about money or power or names carved on buildings. My mother raised me to value truth, to fight through hard days with dignity. I won't trade that for titles or fortunes." Richard studied her, then nodded slowly. "Then what do you want?" Her voice steadied. "A fund. For families like mine. For people drowning in medical bills, working double shifts just to breathe. If you really want to honor my mother, your wife, help others rise from ashes the way she did." For a long moment, Richard said nothing. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that came not from wealth, but from recognition. Done. The weeks that followed moved like a tide. Julian, desperate to stop the truth, was exposed for embezzling company funds. His downfall was swift and public. Investors reeled, but Richard stood taller, his resolve carrying the family through the storm. And alongside the headlines of scandal came another story: the creation of the Phoenix Fund, a lifeline for struggling families across the city. One evening, back in their small apartment, Claire traced the photograph's blurred edges. No longer just a mystery, it was a bridge, connecting her past, her mother's survival, and a future reborn. The bracelet glowed softly under the lamp, a reminder that even the most ordinary lives could ignite extraordinary change. She leaned against the window, watching the city stir awake. The air smelled faintly of coffee and rain. She thought of waitressing shifts, of laughter with Lena, of nights spent counting tips, and realized none of it was wasted. Every hardship had led her here, to this fragile but fierce rebirth. Claire smiled faintly, whispering to herself, "A phoenix never dies. It rises again." And somewhere in the quiet of morning, the city seemed to whisper back, "If one old photo and a piece of jewelry could change your life, what would it reveal?" Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your story.